Hello and welcome to Show and Tell with me, Stephen Leslie, the occasional series where I occasionally show you some photos and occasionally tell you about them, and if you're lucky I might even be in focus and properly exposed while I'm doing so. So this is episode 25, the first one of 2026, and just in case you're wondering why I'm sitting down today, it's because on New Year's Day I managed to sprain my ankle while out walking the stupid dog, and so now you know. So it's just a lot easier for me to be sitting down. But anyway, what on earth are we going to talk about today? Well, we can't really do anything without first saying RIP to Martin Parr. I was going to try and do a whole film on him, but I gave up after about just 10 minutes because I didn't want to do something rushed and inadequate. Obviously, he was a massive presence in photography, particularly in British photography, and his influence was vast. And one day I will try to tackle his legacy properly in one of these films, but not today. I did meet him a couple of times and he was always just a lovely bloke. Plus he took this photo, which I adore, and also this one, and indeed this one. And I could just carry on showing you these photos all day, but I'm not going to. So yeah, 73 is no age and it's a massive loss. One quick thought about Martin Parr while we're talking about him, which may or may not be correct, but it feels correct to me, is that when you think of other British photographers, and I'm thinking of British photographers prior to Martin Parr, you tend to think of people like, I don't know, David Bailey, Terence Donovan, Cecil Beaton, Norman Parkinson, even Lord Snowdon, who, let's not forget, started life as the far more humble Tony Armstrong-Jones. And all of those are good photographers, but they were all very much renowned for taking photographs of famous people and celebrities. Martin Parr didn't take photos of famous people and celebrities. He photographed ordinary people, normal people, and I think his images were far more interesting for that. Like I said earlier, I'll do a Martin Parr film one day, but not today. So what are we going to talk about today? The way that these things usually work is that I spend a long time doing research, and then halfway through writing the script, I realise to my horror that the bloody thing is going to end up being almost an hour long or more. And that's why you only get 2 or 3 of them per year if you're lucky. That's certainly what happened with the last episode, where somehow I managed to spend over 50 minutes talking about llamas in photography. So this time I'm determined to do a shorter and more focused episode. But what's it going to be about? Well, I am working on something else, something big, but it's going to be absolutely huge, to be honest, I can tell you that. However, in the course of doing my research on that film, I came across a photograph that I think can warrant its own separate little film. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to spend a short amount of time looking mainly at just one photograph. And what is that photograph? Well, I'll tell you, but before I do, I should probably tell you how I found it, because I'm fairly sure that this is not a photo that many of you would have ever seen before. As far as I know, it's not in any books, and it's also not all over the internet. I only found it by accident, but I like it, and I think it's one of those photos that hopefully I can use as a kind of springboard to dive into a few wider photographic ideas. So here it is. This is a photograph taken by Henri Cartier-Bresson in London in 1958. And as far as I know, the only place you can see this is if you have access to the Magnum archive, which I do for the moment. The second they see what I've done here, they'll probably revoke it. Oh well. Back to the photo though, and instantly it's intriguing, or at least it is to me, because it's one of those images that operates on several different levels at once. I should also say that I'm not going to be on screen in this episode much at all. Firstly, because I'm sitting down, and secondly, because it makes it a lot easier for me to edit afterwards. So you'll be spending a lot of time looking at the photos rather than at my bald head. Anyway, there's multiple ways of looking at this image. Primarily, we have an encounter in the foreground between these two men, a policeman and this man here in a hat. Behind them, we have what looks like a safe being moved out of, I'm fairly sure it's out of, not into, a shop unit here. And then here we have a small audience of onlookers. These men here are effectively the least important element to this image, but they also act like us. We are also the audience for what is going on. Finally, we have the knowledge that all this took place in London in 1958, which means that we can view this photograph as a kind of time capsule or historical document. It is linked back to a very specific moment that we know, And now, 68 years later, we can look back and try and piece together some of the visual clues that it might offer up and see where we get. So when I first saw this, I thought to myself, oh, well, that's easy. All I have to do is identify some of the constituent parts of the photograph, and the rest of it will simply fall into place, like a jigsaw puzzle. It will be relatively straightforward. But that's not the case. The problem with photographs is that you want them to be like fossils. Fossils which you can analyse and dissect, and which will then definitively reveal their secrets to you, whether they like it or not. But the issue with photographs is that they're not fossils. They don't necessarily have anything behind them at all. Just because this thing here happened, it doesn't mean we can figure it all out simply by looking at or reading or trying to read the photograph. The best we can hope for is to extrapolate as much as possible. So, what can we extrapolate from this image? The answer, unfortunately, is really not that much at all. But let me explain, because the difficulty itself is quite interesting to consider. What do we know definitively about this photograph? Well, other than it was taken in 1958 by Henri Cartier-Bresson in London, not much. What clues do we have? Again, not many. The biggest one is this, the sign here that says the Mayer Gallery. That's a good one. So now we can use that to find the location, can't we? Well, again, it's not as straightforward as it might seem. The Mayer Gallery was started by Fred Mayer in 1925. Here's a photo of it from 1939. And do you know who took this photo? Lee Miller, that's who. Incidentally, I think there's still the Lee Miller exhibition on at the Tate Britain at the moment, although it doesn't contain this photograph. So instantly we have an interesting location. The problem is, where is that location? The gallery was originally at 37 Sackville Street. Then that closed and reopened in 1933 at 18 Cork Street. And now the gallery is owned by Fred's son James, and it is situated at Berry Street. But this photo, it soon becomes clear, isn't taken in either Sackville, Cork or Berry Street. And how do I know that? Well, I live in London, so I went off and went to the gallery and spoke to James, Fred's son. Here's a photo I sneakily took of James while we were talking, and I have to report that he was a fantastic, accommodating host who had just returned from a late, large lunch and was incredibly helpful. And he told me that for a while in the 1950s, his father's gallery was situated at Brook Street, and that's where this photo, which he'd never seen before, must have been taken. Okay, so that's a result, isn't it? We now know that in 1958, Henri Cartier-Bresson was walking along Brook Street and he saw this and he took the photo. Great, what else? Well, there are a few tiny clues in there. This building here is the English, Scottish and Australian Bank, which was at 8 to 12 Brook Street. We also know that this shop here is called Mignon, which was a dressmaker's, but beyond that, it's incredibly difficult to pin anything down at all. Who is this man talking to the policeman? Some people say he looks like Sir John Betjeman, but he's not. I really don't think he is. Look, here's John Betjeman, and yes, he looks a bit similar, but not enough. Who is the policeman? No idea. I've submitted a Freedom of Information request, but so far I haven't got anything back. And then, even if I did get a result, it's a real long shot to expect me to discover the name of the copper, who would now, if he's even still alive, be in his 90s, and then what? Do I expect him to remember everything and tell me the whole story, if there is a story? There's one way of looking at this photo that says this is a bank robbery, and Sir John Betjeman is acting as a distraction or decoy for the robbers, keeping the police occupied while they lift the safe. But that's highly unlikely, surely. Also, up until now, I've been looking at this image along purely historical basis. But what if we examine it aesthetically? Does that help at all? What if I drop the golden ratio diagram thing onto it? That's what people do. What does that do? Well, it sort of shows us that this guy here, his head is in a crucial position. It also tells me that Henri Cartier-Bresson was probably fairly annoyed with this guy's arse, which I would argue is also probably the only reason that this photograph is languishing in the Magnum archives and not in any books. The image is spoiled, possibly even ruined by an arse, which is just one of the many risks of shooting street. I wanted to see if there was any more information I could squeeze out of this image, and so what I thought I'd do is upload it onto a Facebook group page called Old London Photos, which has almost 500,000 members. Surely they'll be able to help collectively, right? Well, I put it up there saying I was doing some research and could anyone help? What do you reckon? No help at all is the answer. Bugger all, in fact. 500,000 useless people. I got lots saying it's a robbery, quite a few saying it's Sir John Betjeman, and then this utterly bizarre comment from some bloke called Michael Baumeister, which just says, staged as many of his pictures. And then we get into some utterly pointless argument over whether or not Henri Cartier-Bresson staged his photos. Presumably, this would include owning a massive safe and hiring people to pretend to be stealing it. Anyway, the argument on Facebook includes this great point made here by Mike Urban, who says, if it was staged, you would have thought he would have arranged it better so that this guy's arse wasn't right behind the coppers boat race. I have a theory that street photography is basically the recording and preservation of moments that would otherwise have been forgotten. Most of the stuff that obsesses us, most of these images are like visual flotsam and jetsam. They should have been forgotten long ago, but the camera makes it possible for us to keep them alive way beyond their natural span. And this can present itself as a problem, because now we have an image, now we have something that could have meaning, but does it? Just because something occurred, does it mean that it has a purpose or carries a message? No, of course it doesn't. Gary Winogrand famously said that, I think there isn't a photograph in the world that has any narrative ability. They do not tell stories. They show you what something looks like to a camera. Now, I used to dispute this. I have made 2 books that try to conjure up stories and narratives out of photographs, but that's me imposing my own thoughts, my own narratives upon random images. This photo here suggests a lot of narratives, but crucially, it isn't actually telling any one story itself. It can't. And now, all these years later, we can't also impose our own version of the truth upon it. It resists that. It's like anti-climb paint. It won't let us get a proper foothold. The fact is that the only people who knew exactly what was going on in this photo are the people in it, and they are all probably now long dead. Plus, they would each only have known their individual reality. Not that of the entire photograph, which is a different, separate reality. One that not even Henri Cartier-Bresson would have known, because he was ignorant about everything that was going on here too. In fact, this all comes back quite neatly to a Martin Parr quote that's been doing the rounds quite recently following his death, where he said that the essence of what his work was to create fiction out of reality. That's ultimately what all street photographs do. They take a real thing and they render it fictional because no one can ever actually know the whole truth. So there you go. That's what finding this one little photograph made me think about this week. Like I said earlier, I'm going to try and do another very long one of these a bit later on. In the meantime, please consider going back and looking at all the other films I've done. There's lots there. And please also consider buying my book, Mostly False Reports. Lots and lots, numerous in fact, copies of which still exist. Yeah, so buy one of these and thank you very much. My name is Stephen Leslie. Thanks for watching. Hopefully I'll see you all again next time. Goodbye.